Since time immemorial, Indigenous people have lived, traveled, and traded in the Puget Sound region. The Donation Land Act of 1850, to encourage westward expansion, allowed American settlers to claim these traditional native lands. The explosion of immigration into the region that followed forced the U.S. government into a fraught treaty-making process with local tribes. The original terms of the Medicine Creek Treaty were inadequate and ultimately unaccepted by tribal leaders, resulting in war. The Indigenous Voices podcast is an extension of the award-winning Puget Sound Treaty War Panel series and Fort Nisqually Living History Museum. The podcast advances tribal voices in the telling of Puget Sound history and shares tribal knowledge and expertise with wider audiences.
In this episode, we wanted to learn more about cultural distinctions among Coast Salish tribes and intertribal relationships pre-treaty era. We also discuss how these relationships were impacted when non-native communities first arrived in the Puget Sound.
Hello, my name is Warren KingGeorge. I'm an enrolled member of the Muckleshoot Indian tribe on my father's side, and on my mother's side, I descend from the Upper Skagit tribe.
I'm Brandon Reynon. I'm the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer and Acting Director for the Historic Preservation Department for the Puyallup tribe. I'm also a Puyallup tribal member.
Nettsie Bullchild, Nisqually Indian Tribe, Director of Archives and Tribal Historic Preservation Office, tribal member, and tribal elder.
To all you good people, it's good to be here. My Indian name is Mist on the Water. I am from the Squaxin Island, Sahel-Wamish, Tepiksin people of the Salish Seas. My name is Charlene Krise. I believe the southern portion of our Lushootseed speakers, they not only spoke our language, but they also had to learn several other languages because of being in a kind of a central marine zone where people came to trade. There was a lot of intertribal trading. And with that came intertribal marriages that helped kind of make it not so different from the north and the south, but there definitely is a difference. There also is a different knowledge when it comes to the marine tides and how they flow. We have inland waters that swirl around points of lands here, and when you're up in the straits, a total different velocity when it comes with the different winds and the tidal changes. And so complete different canoe society. And although we had our marine water canoes down here that had to withstand some heavy duty weather changes, up north though they had to do some ocean type changes, so their canoes were very large. They had some goods up north that we didn't have, and we had goods down here, like our Olympia oysters that we traded and bartered for. In our archaeological site here at Mud Bay, we found dentilium, and the archaeological site was about 500 years old, so the trade-in was a very important part of our culture.
There's a difference in the art, and you can distinguish it from the Haida southbound tribes. We didn't go towards the totem poles. The Canadian tribes, they had a different hierarchy. They had the clans. So it was the totem poles were identifying their clan. And the canoes, if you look at the canoes, they were larger because they were seagoing. And so, in order for trading, you can see as you look at older pictures, they loaded these big old canoes up. They had large families in them. So some of those were different compared to Nisqually, who would have just, mostly had the river canoes, different fishing gears, because like, the Makah tribe, they do the whaling, we don't. You're going to have these artifacts that are going to differ from that different region. So there's a lot of differences that I think happen, but you do have that similarity in because they're all considered Coast Salish, as opposed to the Plains tribes, all the Eastern tribes who do have different traditions, different regalia.
As an archaeologist in this area, a lot of the biggest differences I see is the armory that the northern tribes had, especially as you get up more into the Alaskan tribes. They have some really ornate armory. And the late Judy Wright down here always taught me that we were a peaceful tribe. We were peaceful people down here. Yes, we would defend ourselves if needed, but we would often find ourselves more negotiating, like, well, what do you want? What can we give you? What are you lacking? So we were more of a welcoming, peaceful tribes. But again, we did defend ourselves when needed from the attacking tribes from up north. But we just lack in the archaeological record any type of weaponry outside of what would be considered, just hunting material too. So whereas when you look at those northern tribes, they have specific artifacts that are related to war. One thing that Judy also taught us, we had so much in abundance. I can't think of any battles involving Puyallup, Nisqually, Squaxin in our archaeological record. All the ones that we have recorded in oral history are in defense from being attacked from tribes from the east and tribes from the north. From that, I would say that we were pretty much a peaceful group living, commingling as we on the waterways, using the resources with one another and exchanging and trading generally peacefully.
In our treaty of 1854, the Medicine Creek Treaty, they put in there that we could no longer have intertribal trading with the tribes up north. That was part of who we were as far as Southern tribes. We did a lot of commerce. We did a lot of trading with one another, and that was part of our life. Our people have stories of being able to jump in a canoe and Elder Inlet and be able to ride the strong tide and be up in Fraser River. And even the water helped us to be closer connected. That line that separates Canada and the US, that never was there before. And to us, the Northern people, they are still part of us. We have so many stories as Southern nations of that connection to the Northern tribes.
Yeah, I think Charlene hit it right on the head. I mean, the connection is between the north and south, but even our nations down here, we were all we consider all each other as one, and we were involved with one another just as we are today. Like, even though I'm Puyallup, I still have relatives at Nisqually, at Muckleshoot, down at Squaxin Island, and tribes up north at like Puyallup. I still identify as being Puyallup. We still are our own Puyallup community, but we know that we have strong family relationships in all the different tribes around the Puget Sound. And you can always go to your families in these different tribes and feel welcome. That's something that the Medicine Creek Treaty tried to end. And the goal was to make sure that we couldn't have those interactions, because I think they realized at that time that a lot of our strength as a community came from the fact that we had a vast range of community. I wasn't just Puyallup. I wasn't, and they weren't just Nisqually. But putting us on these little reservations, they were trying to limit our access to our resources. What made us so strong was our ability to interact with the northern tribes, and the tribes north interact with the southern tribes, and have our family units come together. And we see that with treaty wars. The wars were fought by warriors who were all interrelated. That kinship became the power that we drew upon to defeat the militia and the U.S. Army in the treaty wars. And so the goal of the treaty was, again, to make sure that they had to do whatever they could to break up this great bond that the different neighboring tribes had with one another.
With the marriages comes the ceremonies, which is the potlatch, which brings all kinds of tribal people together, because you're bringing all of your family, extended family, and it's back and forth, the potlatches, so that brings a lot of that connection. And also, back in the day, the males of the tribes had more than one wife. So you get that other connection. It was common for a male in the tribe to, as I said before, if he was married, his wife's sister was widowed, they would marry that wife also so that she would be provided for. So with that, you get all of these, like I said, extended family, because now the sister's kids become a part of that family. So there's always this interrelationships that's going on with these tribes and different tribal people. I feel also that when the explorers came, you know, they did take a lot of tribal people as guides. And so with that, you got the family. So sometimes these families were brought over the mountains, you know, all into a different tribe. So there was always this going on with tribes that I think that's why you, in my opinion, you get a lot of this family connection one way or the other. Because I think in the treaty, I believe it's in the treaty that you couldn't have more than one wife, you know. So they did away with that, but that was how it always was. So for my family, because they're intermarried into, like I said, the Hudson Bay, you get that Hawaiian connection because the Hawaiians that came over in the Hudson Bay. So now it's extended clear over to the island.
Establishing a family network is key to access to those natural resources, to those traditional foods that we either don't have a lot of or are very hard to get a hold of. And even though, you know, we live on these post-treaty, post-contact villages now, or reservations, as you call them, most people call them, we still have those contacts. We can still have access to halibut if we want it. We simply just make a phone call to one of our extended family members and work out a trade. If we wish for a mule deer, then we call our friends over in Yakima and ask if they're interested in making a trade. You know, we've got some sockeye that we're willing to trade for some mule deer, backstrap. You know, it's been that way for a very long time. So you can see there are many benefits to having identifying first cousins, second cousins, third cousins, fourth cousins, and up to fifth cousins. That's our traditional way. That's our cultural way, is to, you know, we claim that as family, fifth cousins, and it's a ways out there, right? But that was a value. That was a traditional value. That's a teaching from our old ones, and it also exemplifies the importance of family, and not just because we want to have something unique to eat once in a while, but also for safety reasons, you know, safety in numbers, and it also prevents intertribal warfare. A relation, if you have a blood relative that's a third or fourth cousin, and you know there's a quarrel, you know, it can be easily diffused by simply reminding them that they're family. And so you can see that clearly see the benefits on many levels, and we haven't even talked about the spirituality. You know, that's something that we all have in common, especially the old way, the old traditional spirituality trail. You know, it's still alive yet, but it's not as common, and it's not as mainstream, but it's there. I mean, it exists, even though there's a border there. You mentioned the Canadian border. That doesn't prevent our ancestors and our relatives from exercising that need to practice spirituality. It doesn't prevent the canoe journey from happening, and it doesn't prevent the food from coming across the border.
The relationship we have with our food and how we share it and what we give you as a visitor depends on what we think of you, really, and that still happens today. You know, Peter Puget, when he first came down in his journals, he's coming around with, and he's being amongst the Squaxin people who, for your listeners, they eventually go and are forced to live on the Puyallup and Nisqually reservation. But so he's interacting with them first off as they enter the Southern Puget Sound folks, And the first meal he gets is deer. And I always found that was interesting, that seeing that in our protocols that we know, I mean, salmon, good clams, and all these extravagant meals that we prepare for people. But here are these visitors, and we're like, here's some deer. We're not really going to extend too much on, we don't know who the heck you are. You look funny. We've never seen you before. And we obviously know that a lot of death in preceding you coming here because of all the diseases that were coming and being rampant when they arrived. I guarantee you the meal, if Peter Puget was a known person to the Squaxin people, he would not have been greeted with deer. Now, the deer may have been symbolic, for a reason that to the Squaxin I'm not aware of, but it just seems that, given the ornate, welcoming feast that we are just known to have, and to have such a simple meal upon the first greeting, and then you look at the interactions during that meeting where a line was drawn and no one crosses that line without there being repercussions for crossing that line. So I mean, it wasn't a cordial meeting. It was just kind of figuring out who we are and who they are.
When the first early pioneers and missionaries came into this area, we were very hospitable. When the Royal British Navy came through to the Eldenland, our people were noted to be very friendly, and we shared with them our goods, and of course we accepted some of theirs. When the Oblates from Mary Immaculate came from, there were missionaries in 1852, I believe it was, came to the Olympia area, we were curious about their religion. We tried to understand it, and there's written history documentation of how the people were baptized in the open because they wanted to embrace this new religion, trying to understand it, but then that religion turned on them too. We also have stories here of our tribal women bringing children into this world from an early pioneer man who was very upstanding, and his wife didn't know that he had another woman. There came a time when they were honoring Michael Simmons, I believe it was, and the descendants of Michael Simmons were invited. And so here they were, native and non-native, looking at each other from across the table because they came from this man, Michael Simmons. During the time of the war, in the diaries of the early pioneers, they wrote how that in the Chilton, Mason County area, the tribal people would come to them, to their farms and say, hey, you need to get out of here. My people are so angry. I don't know what they will do to you. Get to Olympia, to the stock house, I think it was, or the fort. And some of them, they weren't moving fast enough, so the tribal people put them in the canoes and paddled them all the way from Arcadia to Olympia. Our people, we cared, we had the humanity, didn't matter what color of skin, but when it came time, when that time of war, yes, our people were very upset. Our people, we helped when there was a railroad coming through, and you'll have to look this history up. They didn't have enough workers. There was not enough money to finish it. And we have a story, historical information of the tribal men getting together and helping to lay down that railroad tie without asking for any payment. We were their teachers, we were their doctors when they first came to this area. We helped bring in those babies. When they were sick, they reached out to our people for medicine. We brought them the medicine, and we cared for our new people that came into this territory. But when it came time on that signing of the treaty, that trust that we had with them, we trusted their words, but so much of what was said at the 1854 Medicine Creek Treaty was forgotten. And yes, that war did happen.
It really changed the everyday life of tribal people. Because you find a lot of the Nisquallies in the stories, because like for the Fort Nisqually being right there, they were more involved now with the fort and with the people. And so it changed the whole part of their everyday life. It also took away, some of their traditional territories where they hunted, fished, and all of that. So you find that they had to kind of deal with what was happening I feel, whether they liked it or not. And the officials, it was more, they just figured they were the law now. So, like I said, giving the land, taking over the tribal land, what were you to do? There went your hunting, your fishing, your gathering spots. The community, when the settlers came in, same thing, put up farmland and took away the pastures for horses, things like that. So, at that time, before the treaty wars, you see a lot of that they were very friendly, and giving, and really helped them to survive, but it just changed because of the military, because of the treaty. Sudden, there was this whole change of your way of life because now you were considered hostile. It blows my mind because here you were just helping them the day before. There's even one story where they were saying that, they allowed a native tribal person to work in the fort, but then at night he had to be locked up, because he was tribal. My great great grandfather, John McLeod, was, arrested just because, he was married to a tribal woman, had a wife. So you were guilty by association. During that treaty era, it just was very confusing, I think, to everybody. You heard rumors, they weren't true. And like I said, who's to define a hostile tribal person?
Based on reading from research and listening to my father talk on his research, there were the relationships between the native and non-native was, I guess a good way to put it was checkerboard. There was really no continuity. I mean, some personalities were, some folks had some personalities that were offsetting, and some were willing to embrace or acknowledge that the native peoples have a right here and belong here. There were ones who refused to pick up a rifle and join the militia and fight the treaty war. They simply said, no, we won't do it. I think it was the Bush family who declined an invitation to join the Governor Stevens's militia to take up arms against the natives. But on the flip side, Stevens didn't have any problem finding people who were willing to join the militia to try and control the natives uprising. I think just like today, I mean, in modern times, you find that there are people who understand the grievances that natives have and have had over generations now. But they also understand that, we really can't turn the clock back. So I think it's best that we just talk about it and bring it out. And I think that's one way to kind of subdue some of those feelings that have been shelved for several generations. And there are some people who get it. I've got some non-native friends. We talked about this as children when we were in junior high and high school. And I jokingly told my native buddies, I said, we've been fighting this fight for years, for generations. It's not over. It's still a fight. And I said, I don't want to blame anybody in particular, but it is the newcomers, it is the settlers who came in and displaced our ancestors, and they were upset about it. And all this land, it was over 2 million acres that was ceded over to the settlers to do with what they will. And natives got a fraction of what they once had. And my non-native friend, he chuckled at me and he goes, well, I want to settle up with you right now, Warren. I don't want any hard feelings. What do I owe you? I still remember that conversation to this day. I'm 57, and that took place when I was 13 years old, I think, or 14 years old. His name is Scott, and we're still good buddies to this day. We're still good friends. But I still remember that comment he made. He pulled out his wallet, and he had, a Velcro wallet, and he had a couple of dollars, and he goes, what do I owe you? I don't want to owe you anything. I just want to be your friend. But and then on the flip side of that, or on the other end of that, there's these skirmishes that have been documented with White River in the city of Auburn, and the cabins or the settlements that were, quote, raided, unquote, and massacred, quotations, that these incidences that occurred here in relationship to the treaty wars, well, those clearly were incidences that were, there's a backstory. There's probably a relationship there that we don't know, that we're not privy to, or has not been documented and or researched enough. So, I think much like today, there are mixed feelings, and there are some unmentionables that need to be mentioned and discussed openly, and like what we're doing here.
I think it's just important on these panels and the podcast to get out the true history of what happened, before the treaty, at the treaty, why the treaty wars, because I don't think people understand what we're talking about, as tribal people. They're just assuming, it's always this, you hear it, you have a reservation, you guys have fishing rights, but it's never, the rest of the history before that was never taught in school, so it's important, I feel, that you're getting all of this information out, that people can really try to understand what happened at that time to help us now in the present. We always use this word decolonization, and but it's like that'll never happen. We won't ever get our land back, but we want people to understand what we went through, what our ancestors went through, and what we're still going through, and why we're fighting, why we still fight the fight, why our next generation need to keep this going. It's just getting that truth out there, that some of the things that really happened, not just what was somebody's opinion or what was in the paper, because you had all of these anti-Leschi people that didn't understand that's not what it was all about.
We're in a time where we watched on the news of George Floyd and the agony that created, yet in that agony out came this sensitivity to social justice. People are sensitized right now, and yes, we need to tell the truth. We need to be able to speak the truth. I'm one of the ones where one of my elders said, we have a really difficult history, but this is what we want from you. We want you to be very careful what you say, because some people cannot carry that emotional weight that we carry as Native people, that sorrow and that anger and that sense of betrayal. And this could be quite a heavy documentation if we delve deep into it, because there's a lot of things that happen to tribal societies that are still kind of here today, and we're trying to fix it. We're trying to help people overcome that generational trauma and the agony of loss. There's a lot of work still ahead of us. History is very important. It's important that we document it, and we as tribal people, we have heard a lot of spoken history that had to be quiet because we didn't have that religious freedom, because of the federal government in the 1880s banned a lot of the religious ways of our people, right down to the clothing we wore, to our musical rattles or the drum. We couldn't do that. Even carrying a medicine pouch, if I were going to take care of somebody, I couldn't do that. And it wasn't until the Religious Freedom Act of, I think it was 1994. That's not too long ago, people. We're still working on it. And that's why I get kind of moved when I hear talk like this, because, it's so important that we keep up the work, because we still have a lot of work to do. I appreciate Fort Nisqually for helping us to get it out. I think it's a good thing.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to join us monthly as we continue the conversation among diverse communities impacted by the Treaty War and its aftermath. To learn more about the Puget Sound Treaty War, visit our tribal partner websites and fortnisqually.org, where you can watch our 4-part panel series on the conflict. This podcast is generously supported by the Tacoma Historic Preservation Office and the Tacoma Arts Commission. Music by Vincent Johnson, Nooksack Lummy, and Nishani Johnson, Jamestown Sklallam Lummy.